Tamara Ugolini here for Rebel News. Well, it's no secret that Canadians are desperately seeking justice for how the COVID-19 response was handled and how certain bureaucracies and levels of government continue to react with draconian measures and apartheid, replacing logical, rational, and evidence-based balanced approaches. So much so that many are being sucked into this concept that Canada is a corporation and not an actual country. And I don't blame them. It's every bit concerning that we are this far into the shortfallings of the COVID response that justice for the needless and grotesque harms caused by policy seems like a far away concept. However, apart from the fact that the vast majority of Canadians treat Canada as a country, there could be serious repercussions for coming to this conclusion that it somehow is not a real country. Joining me to discuss how this notion came about is criminal defense and human rights lawyer Nicholas Wansbutter from Stratford, Ontario. He is the host of a YouTube channel called Don't Talk TV, which is geared toward disseminating legal information, education, and clarification on the principles and applications of Canadian criminal law, with an emphasis on educating Canadians about their basic Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Recently, he published a 14-minute clip titled Canada, Corporation or Country. The concept appears to use the charter that incorporated the Hudson's Bay Company in 1670 to legitimize the claim that Canada is a service corporation and not a country. Nicholas and I are going to discuss that now, so check it out. All right, so thanks again for joining me, Nicholas. First and foremost, where does this notion that Canada is not a country come from?
Well, I don't precisely know the origins because it's not a belief that I've ever held, and it's a little bit murky trying to figure out where this started. It seems to be a stream of thought among the people might be called free men on the land or sovereign citizens. I think there's other different people that have picked up on this. It seems to go back to the fact that in Canada's history, there was originally the Hudson's Bay Company that was granted a charter by the King of England to control a huge section of what's now Canada. And that was a corporation. The Hudson's Bay Company was, in fact, given a lot of the powers that a government might normally have. They had their own police force. They had the ability to operate courts. And that charter was initially granted in, quote unquote, in perpetuity. And I think some people have latched onto that to say, okay, well, since that's in perpetuity, that can never be undone. Therefore, Canada is still a corporation owned by the Hudson's Bay Company. However, I mean, that charter was clearly rescinded, as I covered in the video that I did on this topic on my channel, Don't Talk TV.
Shows you what the wording was before the Statute Law Revision Act, and actually confirms here that this clause was repealed by the Statute Revision Act, and that's what was taken out here.
On the mutual consent of both parties to this contract, being the Crown and the Hudson's Bay Company, that charter was dissolved by an act of Parliament under Queen Victoria was, I believe, the one who signed off on that. And it's like any other contract. If you're, for example, given a permanent contract of employment, that doesn't mean that you're a slave now to that company forever. You can't ever cancel that contract and resign, or any other contract. You know, you can break the contract on mutual consent or under other certain conditions. So that's really why it was in perpetuity, and that it was a permanent contract. However, it was mutually agreed. The Crown actually paid a large sum of money to the Hudson's Bay Company to essentially buy back from them the territories that they'd been given to control.
Section 58 of the Charter says that subject to Section 59, this act shall come into force on a date to be fixed by proclamation issued by the Queen or the Governor-General under the Great Seal of Canada. Now, that date was fixed. You can click on footnote 109 here, and it'll take you down to the date, and I mean, you can find videos and photos online of the Queen signing this and it being proclaimed. So, in my view, it's beyond debate that this has actually been proclaimed.
I thought it was important because it's something that I've seen popping up in my comments box or popping up various places among what might be termed the, quote, freedom movement, unquote. And So, I mean, that causes me concern when I see wrong ideas, because the truth is important. And especially, I don't want to see people who are in favor of very legitimate things in the so-called freedom movement, people who are in favor of our very most basic freedoms and rights. I don't want to see them to be easily cast aside or shown to be, imprudent or even crazy if they hold wrong ideas.
Why do you think that they're taking that stance and clinging to this Canada as a corporation notion?
Well, I don't really know. It probably depends on person to person, but it seems to me that one likely explanation would be that people see that there's something wrong with Canada today and the way things are going in Canada today. So they naturally want to try and find some explanations. And they also want to, I think a lot of people, they want to find some sort of, silver bullet or a magical cure to this situation where they can go and say, hey, look, Canada's not even a country, therefore I don't need to follow any of this stuff. And I think that goes back also to why I think it's dangerous, because people can actually get themselves in a lot of trouble by ignoring the laws of the country. I mean, the fact is, even if it were true that Canada is a corporation, say in law that was actually true, in practice, we know that's not true. Like in practice, if you ignore the laws of Canada, you will eventually get arrested by police and charged criminally for violating the laws that we have. There's some people who refuse to get a driver's license or insurance on their automobile and drive around with no insurance and no license all the time because Canada's a corporation, or they just think the government doesn't have the right to order that. Well, they can very quickly get a minimum $5,000 fine ticket for driving without insurance, or you can go to jail for driving without a license, or anything, crossing the border, refusing to use your passport. You may actually not be able to get into the country if you take it to that extent of saying, well, it's a corporation, so I don't even need a passport. Or people, I've been talking to lots of people, not necessarily because they've gone along with the Canada as a corporation, but I think that line of thinking could lead to troubles where people refuse to answer questions that CBSA is allowed to ask and get thousands of dollars of tickets, you then have to fight in court. It can manifest itself in so many different ways. So a lot of the sovereign citizen people that I've seen in court, they're usually there for bylaw violations, zoning violations, doing things on their land that they're not allowed to, and that, they can end up in court for weeks and weeks, up to months. And again, facing fines. So I think there's anything from tickets to criminal charges can result if you're just not obeying the laws of the land.
Mm-hmm. Just in closing, what would your message be to Canadians who may have found themselves down this rabbit hole and, again, be clinging to this notion that Canada is a corporation and not an actual country?
Again, even if that's true, practically we know that it's not, because the courts, the police, the politicians, none of them believe that, and they're going to continue to act as if Canada is a country. So in a practical reality, you have to act that way as well, unless you want to end up in jail or having lots of fines or having to waste all kinds of time in court. I think the other part of the message would be, that's the practical part of the message. The more philosophical part of the message is, just look a bit more into the history of Canada, speak to people who have actually studied these things my career is in law, for example, right? I didn't just Google search these things, but look into the history of Canada. You can see Canada's always functioned as a country since the 1800s. No one ever talked about Canada being a corporation. If you go back 100 years, 50 years, no one ever talked about that then. So don't come up with something new. Reconnect to Canada's heritage.
Mm-hmm. Well, thanks again for joining me, Nicholas. I hope this gets the point across to some Canadians who may be being misled down this legalese that is not based in fact or merit. So thanks again for joining me.
My pleasure.
Reconnecting with Canadian heritage hits all of the boxes, from politics to culture to law. Canadians want justice. We want explanations and solutions. It's natural. But going about it with this sketchy interpretations of century-old treaties and statutes can come with hefty repercussions that seem to hinder instead of enhance justice. For Rebel News, I'm Tamara Ugolini. Providing reputable lawyering is one of the reasons why we began the special campaign at fightthefines.com. At that website, we crowdfund the legal defense of those facing excessive, egregious, and or utterly nonsensical COVID-related fines. And it's done in partnership with the registered charity called the Democracy Fund, so that your donation qualifies for a charitable tax receipt. Head on over to fightthefines.com, check out some of our reports and some of the victories, and chip in to help cover the cost if you're able to. That website again is fightthefines.com.